This is part 3 of the Great Arcanum 10, Wheel of Fortune of the Mebes Tarot Course. I'm going to miss out some of the arithmetic deconstructions because this is a really long arcanum. So we're going to get to a discussion of fallen humanity. When we come to the story of the fall, we will see that in the primordial state we were looking for a point of suspension in the radiant heights, and not, as it happens now, a point of support in the more dense, in matter, this cluster of illusions. So we should not be surprised by the fact that in the traditional Kabbalistic diagram, which shows how superior mystics are reflected in the composition of the individual man, these reflections are in an inverted hierarchical order. When we get to the story of the fall of such, you will clearly see that if we now take the fulcrum in matter, in this final storehouse of confused illusions, then earlier, in the primeval state, we did not chase the fulcrum below, but behind the gain point in the radiant top. And therefore, may it not surprise you that in the proposed traditional Kabbalistic table, the process of reflection of the highest mystical persons as part of the current individual person, the reflections of the principles are arranged in the reverse hierarchical order. In the composition of man, figure 41, macroprosopo is reflected in the nephesh element, the border region between the nervous system, physical plane, and the lower astral perception, the astral plane. The father is reflected by the element ruach, the soul in the proper sense, that is, a complex of passions, desires, the ability to generate forms, and the ability to perceive and classify those. The mother is reflected by the element of neshama, what we colloquially call reason, intelligence, ideological humanism, etc. The microprosopos is reflected by the element of chaya, derived from the Hebrew word shava, meaning life or breath, that part of a person which enables him to know spiritual bliss. The spouse is reflected in the element of Yehida, the one in the person who unites him with the divine. We see that the list of elements of the composition of man did not include purely material elements, his body, the life force of blood, etc. Only that which determines the nature of the circulation of the nerve fluid has entered. This element is called nephesh, and this animal soul is placed below all elements. So Kabbalah is imbued with the idea that a person, even a fallen one, is nevertheless more closely connected with heaven by the Yehida element than with the earth by the nephesh element. For brevity and convenience, the characteristics of those elements I will combine into a table containing 3 explanatory columns. This table. Nephesh is passive in relation to the external world. It's just a kind of auto-registration of the facts, transmitting them to the soul. He does it in the same routine way, the same for all units of the same species. Ruach evaluates facts recorded by Nephesh according to the personal psychological characteristics of the perceiver. A person, of course, also influences the formulation of laws derived from facts. Laws are combined into fundamental judgments that already belong to the human neshama, which determines uniformly universal human logic up to, including, what we call the transcendental realm. In the transcendental area, the influence of the higher influx of the spirit of Haya, which can lead a person to the consciousness of the Yehida element in himself, is already taking place. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing some of these Hebrew words correctly. In one species, the Nefesh is similar to all its individuals. In those to whom we call like people, the Ruach is similar. Logical argumentation becomes possible only thanks to the presence of the Neshama common to all mankind. Mutual understanding and fraternal solidarity of the blessed is due to the resemblance in them of the higher element. The final reintegration is possible thanks to Yehida. In Kabbalah, the Neshama, in its limited sense, Chaya and Yehida, the three together, are often simply called Neshama, in the broad sense of this term. This one broad Neshama corresponds in the terminology adopted by us as the mens or the mental. The Ruach corresponds to what we call astrosome and Nefesh, the ghost. Having completed the arithmetic deconstruction of the Arcanum, let us return to its symbolic image, the card. Its central part is occupied by a wheel. The wheel synthesizes several representations, the most typical of which, for the profane, is a representation of what we call the mill of the world. This one on the physical plane, the elements of the various lives, so that from the same other lives can grow. Sometimes it all flushes, sometimes on the contrary it elevates a being or a country in detriment of another. It is a ruthless wheel, acting strictly according to the law, however regretfully illusory as any plane in which it operates. The true hermeticist watches the wheel spin with a smile of disdain. He makes use of it, if it is necessary, in order to perform alchemical work, considering it as the elemental root of azoth, sulfur, salt, and mercury. However, in the wheel of the Arcanum 10 is also concealed the astral wheel. Your movement can be perceived and observed only by a person whose sensitivity has already been refined, both in metaphysical speculation and ethical hermeticism. This wheel, by its turn, causes all visible and subtle changes and transformations of the complex giant of life in the world. As we have already said, so that the teachings of Kabbalah could be preserved and transmitted to generations, they were synthesized and, in the form of a deck, entrusted to both initiates and to the profane. This deck contains 78 cards and is called Tarot, or Tarot of the Bohemians. With this we are occupied now. Among these letters, 56 are part of the so-called Minor Arcana, and the remaining 22 are Major Arcana. The Minor Arcana, in its totality, unrolls the Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh scheme in the world of creation of forms of humanity that is not yet fallen. For this humanity, the realization of the great work was a natural task, a normal and customary labor, a job conscientiously accomplished in all its phases. The Major Arcana, on the other hand, are reports that show the fallen man's path, that only with the sweat of his forehead, purifying his conception of the world and transforming himself, can return to the Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh law, which to him has become obscure. Had to become obscure. The present humanity is to separate the tares from the wheat and, paying for its errors, arrive at relative truths. Only via the thorny path of these relativities can it laboriously move toward the absolute, taking the narrow passage between the Scylla of pride and the Charybdis of discouragement. Thus, we can see that only by a misunderstanding the term minors was given to the series of 56 arcana. The minor arcana, metaphysically, are purer than the greater. In addition, they can easily be divided in the metaphysical sense. The scheme of construction is very clear. A mathematician would say that these variables are in strict functional interdependence. In the major arcana, on the contrary, everything seems confusing. They give birth to one another, following some obscure laws. They are comparable to notes on a piano that can be tuned in a scale of thirds, fifths, or octaves, or taking into account that the tuner uses to check the quality of their work, the imperfect human ear. In short, we could say that in the lesser arcana, the cliché Yod-He-Vau-He unfolds correctly, and that in the major, this unfolding presents a confused, deformed, adopted to the world of illusions and limited understanding. Let us first deal with the minor arcana. The 56 tarot cards are divided into 4 suits, each containing 14 cards. Wands symbolize Yod, Cups, the first He, Swords, the Vow, Coins, the second He. Where and in what family can we find these elements? Establishing a relationship between the 4 suits and the 4 persons of the first family, the transcendental, we will find that Wands correspond to the influence of the higher Yod, transcendental love. This influence is reflected in all the Sephira of the second family. We will study the reflection of this as well as the other influences only in the Sephira Chokmah, where, before the fall, our souls remained, forming the synthesis of humanity, the universal man. Wands, therefore, are the accounts of what, in soul, corresponds to this Yod, that is, to active love, descending, which fecundates with its radiation. This love is the first impulse for any beginning, within any individualized, closed system. In Sephira Chokmah, it will be the initial impulse of souls in any direction. Cups correspond to the reflection of the first He, the transcendental life, the superior love, upward, attractive, occupying second place in the deck. Swords, the reflection of Vow, the influence of the Logos, brings back the element love, but love androgynous, love that creates the new life according to the similarity of its own birth. The Vow, thus manifesting itself as architect of the universe. It comes from the union of the active love with passive love, emanating from the point on the Vow by its polarization. Moved by a love to what is above, and acting in the likeness of the point on Vow, on Yod, decided to love the what is below, thus becoming the architect of the universe. Swords, therefore, symbolizes the transmission by the Logos of the life of the mother by the power of love. Love is similar to that of the father. Coins represent the influence of the second He on souls. The second He of the first family is characterized by the emanation of the 10 Sephira of the second family. The emanation was the first stage of that which, on the physical plane, we call realization. Let us not forget, however, that the physical realization is only a stark analogy of primordial emanation. The transcendental manifested himself by the transcendent. The transcendent made himself known by form. The shape it condensed, giving rise to the dense. For our convenience, we will use the term achievement, referring to coins. In each of the 4 suits, we have firstly 4 figures. They symbolize active people, conveying the idea of the suit. In addition to the figures, each suit includes 10 other cards with values, from the 1, the ace, to the 10. These letters correspond to the 10 Sephira of influence of this suit. Let us first deal with the figures of the 4 suits. Each suit has its king, the Yod, then his lady or queen, the first He, the Knight, the Vow, and his Jack, second hay. The latter is the server that conveys the influence of the suit. In modern decks, the Knights were suppressed. There is only the King, the Queen, and the Jack. Each of these figures acts in the field of each of the 10 sephira of his suit, which results in a 4 times 10, which equals 40 combination of influences. Therefore, the number of combinations for the deck of the tarot will be 160 if, as was proposed, we limit ourselves to the analysis of the reflexes of the influence of the first family exclusively at Sephira Hokmah. If we analyse the reflections in all 10 sephira, we would have 1,600 kinds of influence. That'd be a long video. In the present study, we will give only a brief explanation of the role of the 16 figures, as well as the titles of the Sephirotic charts of numerical values of all 4 suits. And here I'm going to pause, I think, because that's going to be really long. Just cutting a bit. It could be said that the minor arcana, or the suit of coins, corresponds to the scheme of the world as it stood before humanity before its fall, while the first 10 major arcana corresponds to the understanding of our truths by the already fallen humanity. If we could purify the first 10 major arcana by taking from them the envelope that formed around them, we would obtain the arcana, the numerical values of the suit of coins in its natural succession. So the magician would correspond to the 1 of coins, the high priestess to the 2, and so on. Let us return once again to the major arcana, enumerating them according to the natural order of letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and indicating at the same time the numerical value under the hieroglyph that each of them was attributed to by former initiatory schools. These hieroglyphs will allow us, even if it be done in a brief and incomplete way, to unroll the system of titles of the arcana which have not yet been studied in the fields of the Theosophical Ternary. Titles are indispensable for understanding the general picture of Kabbalistic speculation. So we're coming to another table. It's not got them all on there, but it's got the first ones. And then the last 3, Resh and Tau at the top. Again, I'm going to skip a little where he's expanding on the meaning of that table in the Hebrew letters. I'm going to jump to Shin, the letter Shin, which is associated with the Fool. The Arcanum Shin belongs to the primordial mysteries and has its origin in the emanation by the archetype of the world Olam Ha-Atziluth. Therefore, the first title of this arcanum will be Radiatio, in relation to the knave of the first family. In the field of man, the Arcanum Shin is realized when the human astrosome connects with a sign egochorically generated by a chain of pentagrams and, therefore, possessing a realizing power. Thus the second title will be Signum, in the sense of a stable astral symbol. The Arcanum Shin is no stranger to the activity of nature. It realizes it when it materializes the form. third title of the Arcanum will therefore be matter. The reason I jumped to Shin is it's really the crux of so much of this study. It's readers of Meditations on the Tarot will also be aware that Shin is the letter which leaps out for its significance in mastery of this letter. Is, if you've mastered Shin, you've really mastered the work. But you can also die by that sword. So let's have Shin in mind if we're going to study this course properly. Kabbalah divides the signs of the Hebrew alphabet into 3 essential groups: the 3 mother letters, the 7 double letters, and the 12 simple letters. The mother letters, Aleph, Mem, Shin, symbolize the basic metaphysical aspects of the ternary. Aleph corresponding to the neutral term, Mem to the negative pole, and Shin to the positive pole. The triangle of the Great Arcanum in this notation system is presented here. Any combination of these 3 letters can be interpreted in terms of the ternary. Assigning to these letters correspondences in the field of the elements and writing Mem, Shin, Aleph. Aleph means conditionally air, Shin fire, and Mem water. We thus get the phrase, the water placed on the fire evaporates, assuming a gaseous state similar to the air. By using the hermetic terms but metaphysically, the same combination of letters can be read. If in space we observe phenomena, that is, modifications of energy, we will also notice the passage of time. Here space is Mem, energy is Shin, time is Aleph. In the mystical interpretation, the Aleph, Shin, Mem combination can be read as the inert element, that is the profane, Mem, encouraged by the energy, Shin, elaborated in him or transferred by him, becomes a magician and an androgynous being, Aleph. The second group is the 7 double letters, Tau, Resh, Pe, Kaf, Daleth, Gimel, Beth. I've read those out backwards. Which corresponds symbolically to the 7 secondary causes. If the mother letters can be metaphysical, the 7 double letters can be called planetary or astral. Their correspondence is as follows: Beth, Moon, Gimel, Venus, Daleth, Jupiter, Kaf, Mars, Pe, Mercury, Resh, Saturn, Tau, Sun. These letters were called double for the following reasons. From the etymological point of view, they initially had 2 modes of pronunciation, Ver and Ber, and it's 2 modes of pronunciation, which I'm not going to try to do. And secondly, from the esoteric point of view, we know that each of the planetary influences has both a good side and a bad. The good aspect of Jupiter, for example, is expressed by the affability, ability to deal with people, etc., and its bad aspect is in its pride, etc. The 12 simple letters correspond astrologically to the 12 zodiacal signs: He, Aries, Thou, Taurus, Zain, Gemini, Cheth, Cancer, Teth, Leo, Yod, Virgo, Lamed, Libra, Nun, Scorpio, Samek, Sagittarius, Ain, Capricorn, Zadik, Aquarius, Kof, Pisces. As you know, the 12 zodiacal signs in the plane of nature symbolize the 12 phases of a complete solar cycle, that is, a cycle of the sacrifice that in our planetary system is made by the Sun on behalf of the Earth, sending her astral fluids. In the ethical field, the Arcanum 12, Lamed, the Hanged Man, symbolises the sacrifice of man to the nature or the divine. This sacrifice can only be done by an incarnated pentagram, like Jesus. At the plane of the archetype, the 12th Arcanum is the Arcanum of the Messiah. This brings up again the idea of incarnation, therefore, of the physical plane, showing it as a plane of sacrifice. We can also, reversing, regard sacrifice as something closely related to the physical plane. We've got another table. Figure 43 presents the scheme of the Major Arcana as an outline of the Yod-He-Vav-He law. Notice that the system of the Minor Arcana is interpreted in the same way. The difference is that the Minor Arcana's numerical value cards exactly and totally perform this interpretation. Minor Arcana could be compared to a perfect musical instrument, while the Major Arcana would correspond to an imperfectly tuned instrument, and at only approximately similar intervals. One of the instruments, the exact one, was destined to undiminished humanity, the other, the imperfect, to the confused worldview of fallen humanity. Okay, that's a good place to pause. Not finished, nowhere near.